this is your blatant reminder that Formula One, it does not hang around. Because we've got yet another race for you to all set your alarm clock for. And what's more, it's a sprint weekend. Oh, remember the chaotic one from last year? Fun! What's not so fun is the surprise that the FIA gave us not long after the Australian Grand Prix. No, it's not the news the FIA president has chosen to step down graciously. No, it's to do with those pesky flexi wings again. Instead of waiting for the Spanish Grand Prix to do something about it, some of the stricter tests are being enforced right now, more specifically around the rear wing, and this was highlighted in a really detailed document on autoracer.it. The FIA noted that during pre-season testing in the first race weekend, teams were doing all they could to replicate something similar to what McLaren brought to Baku with their mini DRS innovation, which was legal at the time, by the way. Now, as we all remember, the Spanish Grand Prix was going to bring in some new rules for the front and rear wing which would make them far less flexible, which would effectively break the season into two parts. So even though these technical rules have been clarified, you don't really care about that. You just want to know who it's going to affect the most. And if you're a Mercedes fan, based on what we saw in Melbourne, you might want to sit down. Now, granted, the margins between the top four teams are not that vast, it's within a couple of kilometers an hour, but given that the Shanghai track has that infamously long straight before the final section, it might exacerbate the changes where Kimi Antonelli might have realised to everyone that Mercedes might have gotten the most out of the clarification regarding the flexi-wing debate. Because the article makes it clear that whilst the FIA isn't officially singling out any one team, the changes are aimed at clamping down on those that have been benefiting most from mini DRS-like deflections. Because apparently the FIA is not all that happy that some of the teams have decided to take the clarification that was destined for Barcelona and just simply went, fudge it! We'll just make the wings as flexible as possible. Flexing so much that you could just put them to music with Westlife's You Raise Me Up. So they can find a few tenths. You raise me up! Because according to the data, the average speed gains from the deflections were around 24 kilometers an hour for Mercedes compared to 23 for both McLaren and Red Bull, and only 22 kilometers for Ferrari. So basically that's between 14 to 15 miles an hour difference for the Americans. And thanks to Formula data analysis for these top speed charts, you can tell the difference extremely when Kimi used DRS most of the time, whereas George, all on his lonesome, never used DRS. The differences on average were quite stark. So this might suggest that Mercedes were extracting the greatest advantage from their extra rear wing movement, making them the likely target of the new directive designed to cut that benefit by 75%. So if I had to take an informed guess as to who would benefit the most from this clarification and the two-part structure for 2025 regarding the flexi-wing thing, then I would suspect that Mercedes managed to get the most out of it, albeit slightly. But that's to be expected in 2025. The gains to be had when we've had the regulations for so long are going to be minuscule, but every single mile an hour counts, or kilometre an hour, or whatever floats your boat, or tickles your odometer. But it is rather interesting that the FIA is choosing to make these changes right now, and even though the FIA is quick to head off social media at the past and claim, indeed, that it's not targeting one specific outfit, people will probably still complain and accuse a team of cheating anyway. However, considering that Ferrari stood to gain the least amount from the flexible parts of the car, this evening out of the regulations could help them a little bit in China to not be so woefully behind the likes of their competitors. It might not be much, but it's honest work, because the Scuderia have got a lot to answer for given what happened last time out, and I went to a lot of detail about it in my video from yesterday. Just so you know, it wasn't a rage bait piece about Lewis Hamilton. Everyone at that organisation has got some responsibility for what happened out there, including Charles Leclerc. However, so does the way that Red Bull go about things with their junior program. Yes, it's historically been the most effective way to get into F1, with most of the grid now comprising of drivers who at one point were affiliated with Red Bull, but the outpouring of emotions from Isack Hadjar, the embrace from Lewis Hamilton's father Anthony, and then the complete dismissal and mild derision from you-know-who, and then we see what's going on over at Mercedes and even Haas with how Oliver Behrman and Kimi Antonelli are being handled with their integration, and now even Alpine realising that, oh, yeah, maybe we were a little bit too unsupportive of Jack now on reflection. It's really opened the door. No, it's smashed down the door with a spanner as to how toxic the Red Bull Junior Team program is. And you might be going, well, duh, Law, we all knew that. But What Hadjar just did has just completely blown everything away. It exposed a huge and systemic problem with the Red Bull organization in a way that no other driver has done before. Not even how Liam Lawson is being handled at Red Bull could really shed some light as to what Isack actually expressed. And of course, we don't know all the thoughts going through Hadjar's head at the time, but it's probably safe to say that he would have been terrified of what he could suspect Helmut Marko would be saying to him once he actually got into his office, which is why he kept his helmet on. It's a tradition for any driver. If they don't want to talk to the media, they keep their lid on. And sure enough, what he showed to the world was a raw and honest and human response, which of course Dr. Marko expressed as a little bit embarrassing, which is not exactly conducive in trying to make the situation better. What would have happened if Anthony Hamilton hadn't been there and just done what he did and give the guy a hug? The father of the mentor of Isack Hadjar. If he had not been there, I dread to think where Isack would have gone in his mind. It could have been an absolute catastrophic spiral that he might not have been able to get out of. But thankfully, with that hug, maybe it could have saved his career. This might actually help him to do better. And quite frankly, at this point, Dr. Marko, for everything you said, not just about Isack, but about Jack Doohan, Liam, Gabi, no, you're a bit embarrassing, sir. Because what Isack just did has called your organization out the most I have ever seen. Because it was a raw human response. And that's been reflected with the wider F1 community choosing to protect Isack rather than criticizing him, circling around him, supporting him, especially the Yuki fans I've noticed, which was a surprise but a welcome one. And look, I don't want to dwell on this for too long because this is a preview for the Chinese Grand Prix, but I wanted to say something about it. But if you would like me to cover this as well as the broader Red Bull significance and impact for the junior program, do let me know down in the comments by putting in a hugging face emoji. And this time I will put the icon here so that means you know which one to use. Thank you. Either way, all that Helmut Marko did during the Australian Grand Prix weekend was undo all the work Christian Horner and Red Bull had done to rebrand themselves as maybe a more tolerant, open, reflective organisation and team. And it's also given Zach Brown and Toto Wolff more ammunition to just point at Red Bull and say, hey, those guys are pretty toxic. We wouldn't do that if we were in their shoes. We would treat our drivers with respect and support and compassion. Although I am watching what will happen between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris closely, you could say that I shall hold position on the matter. Now, when it comes to the circuit itself, there are many things about the circuit which gives me some sense of hope that Lewis Hamilton might be able to rebound since, well, he's won at that track a total of 6 times in his career thus far, more than anyone else. And whilst this certainly might help him give him some clarity and hope for the future, considering that the Chinese Grand Prix is expected to not have any threat or trace of rain whatsoever, I think the most on Sunday is going to be, what, like 5% or something like that? It's essentially negligible. But the fact remains is that the debut he had with the Scuderia was not the dream start that he might have hoped for, to emulate the likes of Kimi Raikkonen, Fernando Alonso, and Nigel Mansell. Because from all of the discourse I've seen on social media, people now understand what it's like to be a Ferrari fan if you've been a Lewis Hamilton supporter. That tolerance will not last long though. Because they get it, doesn't mean they have to like it. The name of the game for Lewis now is to address those communication issues and to perhaps assert himself more in relation to strategic calls, since it's now becoming clearer that the contributions of Carlos Sainz might have run deeper than we previously thought, that the department at Maranello might really be missing Sainz. But you know that old song about how you don't know what you got till it's gone? I think it's evident here. But having said that, where Ferrari are right now because of what happened in Melbourne, it's really hard to pinpoint. Are they still up there with McLaren and Mercedes and Red Bull? Or have they started off on the back foot a little bit? Maybe the extensive work they've done on the SF25 might have been a little bit too extreme, and they need to claw some of that progress back again in the next few races, maybe by the time we get to Europe. Could this FlexiWing clampdown have come at the right time to help bring the front runners back toward them? Maybe. But there does seem to be an issue regarding steering for both Leclerc and Hamilton. Similar protestations of being unable to turn the car, which also Lewis experienced whilst at Mercedes the last couple of years. Maybe that plan to basically tailor the car toward Lewis's style might have been a little bit too literal. I am not going to be writing off Ferrari for the entire season. It's far too early to say that. But there has to be a plan at Maranello to bring that car back to where it's supposed to be. I do think Ferrari will score more than they did in Australia, but in reality, That's not exactly hard to do, considering they scored only a total of 5 points and are 7th in the Constructors. And if you want to really realise how bad of a position that is, not only are Sauber ahead of them in the team standings, but in 2020, their worst year as a whole as a constructor for 40 years, at that first race in Austria, they were 2nd! Charles Leclerc put that car on the podium where it wasn't supposed to be! I already know the Tifosi will be shuddering in their boots with me reminding them of 2020. There needs to be a change quickly. As for the rest of the pack, could we see perhaps Kimi Antonelli pull off another barnstormer of a performance and see to it Mercedes remain a contender for the Constructors, considering they are currently equal on points to McLaren, but McLaren only have first due to the fact, well, Lando won the race, whereas George was 3rd. Count back? I mean, that would be a tall order, considering Oscar Piastri was destined to be 2nd place at the very least, and he had that spin, as we all know. And then George and Kimi, that would have been decent. 2nd place for right now, Mercedes, that's not a bad shout. It's still really good to know that the replacement for Lewis Hamilton has come into his own rather quickly, and now has become the 2nd youngest point scorer of all time in Formula 1. But I seriously doubt as of now, and I hope that Kimi can prove me wrong, that he could do much in China since he has never driven at the Shanghai circuit in any series he's partaken in. And as much as I would love to say that he could, I'm not going to get blinded by the hype in this regard just yet. However, if he can do that and rack up a good amount of points, even if it's outside of the top 5, then it's really safe to say now, or at least safer, that this kid is the real deal. All of the videos that F1 content creators have been making about Kimi Antonelli, Toto's decision to put him in the car, then it will have borne fruit already. And he's only 18! I also suspect that Williams will be in the points again this time out, and if Alex can build on his hugely impressive P5 and Carlos can, well, finish the race on the track instead of in the strategy department, a double points finish is a feasible shout. And then, in just 2 races, Williams will have amassed more points than they had done throughout the entirety of 2024. And if they really keep up this pace, they could maybe outscore 2023 before we get to the European leg of the year. And also in terms of points, I am now starting to think that maybe Fernando Alonso could be a little bit fired up, because over the radio, he sensed there might have actually been some potential where his Aston Martin car could have had some grunt and competitiveness after all. He was frustrated he couldn't get higher in qualifying. He felt there was more left in the tank. So I suspect a cheeky points finish for Fernando, especially considering how well he did in China last year, getting 3rd on the grid in that car that was underdeveloped when compared to its rivals. It might not be enough to outscore Lance Stroll's 6th place effort, and I still stand by giving him credit where credit is due. It's important to be like that if you are making content like this. You can't ignore the times where he's actually good. And also, I just realised he has a new race engineer for this season, Lance, Gary Gannon. That's Mick's Schumacher race engineer, and I have good feelings about that. I feel Gary treated Mick well, considering what he had to deal with in general with Gunther and Haas. And I also suspect that Sauber might round out the top 10 with a cheeky point that they were destined to have last year with Valtteri Bottas. He might have come home in 10th place had his engine not packed up, because the pit crew didn't have as much of an issue that time around, because they were having growing pains with their kit. So I wouldn't be surprised if Nico Hülkenberg maybe scores a point this time out, that he might surprise himself yet again. The comments that he was making, that Sauber might have finally cracked the problem they had last year, where they would just completely fall off in the second half of a race for no reason that they couldn't really discover. Maybe they finally discovered it. Maybe Mattia Binotto has actually managed to find something, because according to Binotto, when he arrived at the Sauber factory, they had no direction. Andreas Seidel was just coasting. He had no idea what to do with that team. He was completely dumbfounded, whereas Mattia, he was there and managed to sort something out pronto. No Spinala required. Ah, yes, my Italian father from another life, he came good. You know, similar glasses, similar hair. I am Mattia Binotto's estranged British son. As for Alpine, well, I would hope that Jack Doohan can bounce back from his own spin at his home race, and maybe build upon his quite solid efforts in practice, where he either matched Pierre, his more experienced teammate, and maybe sometimes bested him. Because we gotta remember that Lewis Hamilton's spinning in Q2, he got through into Q3, but it did put pay to a number of drivers who were hoping to have one last go of getting into that qualifying session, including Jack Doohan. It would have put him off by a couple of tenths. And considering that the field spread for this grid is incredibly small, a couple of tenths can be enough, from going from 10th to 14th. So I am watching this unfold with great interest. It turns out that Jack Doohan might not be as slow as some people might have suspected. He might be really close to Pierre. Close enough, maybe, to thwart off Franco for the entire year. I want him to make Flavio Briatore squirm, but we all know that he won't, because he will just pivot and go, "Hey, Jack is my guy, I knew he had it in him after all." Slippery one, that Flav. And as for Oliver Oakes, where has he been? Because he's now finally started to come out of the shadows, Drive to Survive barely acknowledging him as the team principal, and actually do something! Him now admitting the team had not done enough to defend Doohan after months of speculation about his future. Oh, I really want to get my spanner out for this topic, but I will save myself here. I don't want to yap on about that too long. But if you want me to break out the wrench, I mean, not toward anybody, I'm not that unhinged, then use a wrench emoji down in the comments, so that means I may know in terms of where I can go for the next couple of days. Thank you very much. But I know exactly where I'm going to go now, and that is giving you my top 5 predictions for the Chinese Grand Prix. Now, I will be honest, and you may chalk it up to me being completely biased as a McLaren fan, but there is very little telling me that McLaren were pinning all of their hopes on 2025 on flexible wings. There might be more to it, because especially the reason why they put Rob Marshall up there to get the Constructors' Trophy in Melbourne was an indicator that that engineering whiz might be just as impactful for that team as maybe signing Adrian Newey. So there's very little telling me that my prediction of maybe a McLaren 1-2 won't be the same here, so I'm suspecting it's going to be Lando Norris again, followed by Oscar Piastri. And I suspect that Lando will want to continue the form that we saw, that even though Max Verstappen did get pretty close, it is very clear to see that the Lando Norris we saw in the middle of last year no longer exists. His communication over the radio was incredibly impressive. He kept control, and he was able to actually talk with Will Joseph, his race engineer, about what to do regarding the rain and tyre strategy. Yes, of course, he did go off, but he kept it on the road, and he did get back the win. But considering that the track conditions at Shanghai are going to be relatively mild, there is no threat of rain, the temperatures are going to be in the mid-20s, so it's fairly plain bog standard for a Formula 1 Grand Prix, there is nothing telling me that McLaren won't be able to just do the business and then just romp off home, especially considering that their tyre degradation is absolutely mesmeric and voodoo-like. But Norris's ability to be able to respond to any of the threats, including from his own teammate, were really testimony to the fact that he's been doing some developing. So I think he'll be taking the momentum that he got for winning the opening race of the season, and then making sure it's back-to-back victories. In fact, Abu Dhabi he won last time out, 3 victories in a row. However, I don't feel like he'll be getting a complete easy run for his money, because I am going to be pegging Oscar Piastri in second place, but only a few seconds behind him, because I don't think you need me to tell you that Oscar, after his incident where he span off, he got the car back, and according to what Oscar said, jokingly or otherwise, he thanked Jeremy Clarkson's 40-minute training session with reversing a tractor into a barn as something that helped save his bacon. Despite that incident, what we saw in Melbourne is that he has learnt a lot over the winter, that he is ready to battle at the front, because there were genuine moments where he was really close to getting one over Lando, but unfortunately, what happened, it threw him off a little bit, but that will not happen again, because I'm pretty sure that Mark Webber and he would have had a chat with themselves and McLaren to make sure such confusion and lack of clarity will happen again. And at the same time, I do think that also Oscar will demonstrate more examples of what Mark Webber was able to demonstrate at Red Bull for playing the team game whilst also stamping down your disapproval of those particular orders. That fire is underneath him now, and that can easily spur them both on to domination this season, or at least them being completely on the same page, or it can lead to utter chaos. But that excitement to know that maybe at this Grand Prix, they could be within a few seconds of each other, we could get maybe Mercedes 2016, albeit far less toxic, hopefully, and far less destructive, then cool, that's great for the entertainment value. And by the way, Piastri did hold his own on the C3 tyre a lot in pre-season testing. It's going to be C2, C3, C4 for this weekend, by the way. So we're not going to have the C5 tyre, which people had barely little information over. So expect some of the teams that struggle with that tyre to maybe hold their own a little bit better, because there's more reasonable data. and Piastri demonstrated that his race runs were fairly solid alongside Lando's. So a McLaren 1-2 is certainly on the cards, and I feel like the hunger that he got from the first race of the season, that will fuel him on, much like how Lando's confidence for winning the darn thing will fuel him. It's gonna be good. But what will also be good is that Max Verstappen, I suspect, will be on the podium, because he likes this track as well, since he won in spectacular fashion last year. And what last time out showed us is that he is going to be a perennial frontrunner no matter what machinery he is in. This is Alonso 2012, and I am loving it. By the way, for those of you who don't know what perennial means, it means all year round. My wife's a gardener as well as a teacher, so she knows that, and I know that too now. Otherwise I wouldn't have. And even though I suspect the McLaren will favour the characteristics of Shanghai more than the Red Bull, if they can dial it in, it is showing more and more evidence that the Red Bull can answer the call, which will be fantastic for the team title, and really give me more justification that the top 4 teams, or at least, second, third and fourth, will be spread by a mere 40 points. One bad weekend could see you toppling down from second to fourth, losing tens of millions of dollars. So every single driver is going to have to be on it, including Red Bull stepping up for Liam Lawson, and he stepping up to the plate equally. But in any case, the Honda engine around this track, it's gonna be good. And Red Bull has plenty of experience with this track. They won their first race here, so I think it's safe to say that Red Bull are going into this track fairly confident that they can rebound from Australia, which even then wasn't too bad if you're in the Verstappen side of the camp. Perhaps he and Lando might be able to duke it out in qualifying or something like that, but something I did see in Melbourne is that both of them were really happy for each other. There was no aggression, there was no tension, no awkward silences, and I bet you that maybe behind the scenes with a private conversation while they both live in Monte Carlo, that they might have made some sort of pact to be all charming and lovey-dovey and happy-go-lucky with each other to make sure that Netflix and Liberty Media have no material to use to try and paint them as arch-nemeses. It's going to be so much fun seeing all of these outlets squirm, trying to find material that clearly isn't there and is being deliberately kept from them by Max and Lando. I hope Charles can get on the act as well. But one who I don't suspect will join in on the fun and will really want to try and make some drama where there might not be, or it could be instead, George Russell, 4th place. Because what Melbourne showed us is that he could put in consistent performances with that car. That Mercedes machine had the best start of any season in the ground effect era with a podium that nobody really noticed because, well, he was relatively anonymous. He just got on with the job. Yes, of course, he was helped out by Piastri falling down the order, and then Charles Leclerc spinning out of contention, but in any case, he came home with the points. It was a Mercedes 3rd and 4th, which is fantastic news, and will bolster his confidence as well, knowing that he does have a teammate to help motivate him, almost as much as Lewis Hamilton, maybe even more so, and not to mention that the car is something that he can agree with. The C3 tyre in particular, the Mercedes W16, loves that kind of rubber because they brought the most amount of that compound to Bahrain preseason testing. They had the most data out of any other team. That is going to be very interesting to watch. However, considering that we've got both McLarens on good form, Max Verstappen fired up, more confident and surprised to find himself still in contention for some serious pointage, I do feel like George might not have enough in the tank to be able to outdo them. But I suspect he won't be that far behind. He'll give it a darn good show. So perhaps we might see something with this Mercedes car like in the first half of 2022, where George found himself consistently in the top 5, just raking in the points, and maybe Kimi Antonelli might be not far behind him, picking up points of his own. Then in 5th place, I feel like a Ferrari will be here, but it will be Charles Leclerc. Because much like how Oscar Piastri will be fired up to make sure to really turn the screw on his teammate and team, Charles Leclerc will be wanting to do the same thing. Both Ferrari drivers are entering Shanghai with a huge burden of a disappointing weekend in Australia and one of their worst starts to a season in years. Hopefully, it will energise both of them further, Charles Leclerc even more so. Because when the conditions were a little bit more stable, Leclerc did win out. He got first blood. Similar issues that befell Lewis befell Charles. Information overload. There needs to be a clarification, and I hopefully think that that will happen, considering the dynamic that Buzzi and Leclerc already have. The driver's relationship with their race engineer is pivotal. That it's both men who are responsible for the glories of both them, the driver, and the team. It is a team effort. This is proof. However, Leclerc's driving still remains methodical and precise. I still have confidence that he can get the most out of that Ferrari machine simply for the fact that he's been around the block a few times with that outfit. He gets the operation. He understands that the strategy department can sometimes evade them or be absent entirely. That maybe Charles can learn a thing or two from Carlos to think about strategy from the outside, come up with his own inventions, think on the fly, be able to make calls and put the team down and make them not have to worry about it. Because, admittedly, the slick tyre strategy on a wet track might have worked had it not rained again. It was an ambitious effort, but much like with how Yuki Tsunoda was compromised, so was Lewis. And Leclerc, again, the spin, I think he'll be wanting to try and forget that. And the fact of the matter is, though, that the setup of this car and the general car itself, it is off the pace when compared to the likes of McLaren, Red Bull, and even Mercedes. Something needs to be done, but I don't think there'll be much change in just a few days. Unless, of course, they can have a resurgence akin to McLaren in 2023 and 2024, well, that simply wouldn't matter. But given how close we are to next year and the brand new regulations, I don't really see that happening, because maybe we'll just reach a point where Ferrari will just give up on the season and look to 2026, which would be perfectly reasonable. But will the fans allow that, though? That remains to be seen, because I seriously doubt that Ferrari can go for the win this time out. I think they'll be happy with even just being in contention for a podium, top 5 maybe. There is still more work to be done. But what they can do is tighten things up, because things have gotten a little bit lax and the preparation over the winter clearly wasn't enough for both sides with this brand new car. Because Williams are right there. They proved, even if Carlos Sainz did drop it, that they can easily irritate the front runners. And I really didn't suspect that Ferrari would have been their first target. And it was especially problematic for his teammate last time out, contributing to Ferrari having the most disappointing debut for a driver of theirs since Luca Badoa 16 years ago. To find out why the team as a whole needs to do better for their star signing, and I can assure you this is not rage bait, watch this video next, straight after this one.